Hello, hello, and welcome back to the Black Girl Iowa podcast. I'm your host, Emily, and you guys, episode 29. Thank you so much for being here. Kind of like I said, like in my episode last week, episode 28, which was when I decided to go ahead and wrap up my year, the year that was 2024. I am so excited to go forth in 2025 and continue on this podcast journey. And today's episode is really great. And it's leading actually into a couple of things that I do have going on this year. So, the first thing I do want to talk about real quickly with you all is the Black Girl Iowa 2025 Reading Challenge. So, I have picked, I believe I have 20 books on the list, which I will be sure to link in the show notes below, of books that I would like to read this year, because now that I am no longer in grad school, I have this thing called free time. I know, right? And I would really love to get back into reading. Reading has always been something that I have loved ever since I was a child. And for a few years there, I was reading a lot of books. I mean, a lot of books. And I have an incredible personal library. And before I get into today's episode with the interview with an amazing person, I do want to talk a little bit about the book that I am choosing to read from the list for this month. And that will be Cass, The Origins of Our Discontents by Isabel Wilkerson. So this book was recommended to me actually by Dr. Kia Levy. She was on an episode from earlier last year in which we talked about diversity, equity, inclusion, and why it's important in spaces, especially in higher education. I've talked about this on the show before, but diversity, equity, inclusion is currently under attack. Those words, unfortunately, are synonymous with Blackness, and people feel that those words are not necessary in our progression as a people, as a society here in America. And even here in Iowa, there was a bill that actually passed that is basically makes it illegal to have diversity, equity, and inclusion offices at our big colleges and universities here in the state, which would be Iowa State University, the University of Northern Iowa, and the University of Iowa. All three of those diversity, equity, and inclusion offices have since closed. And actually, it was just came out in November that one of the oldest LGBTQIA student centers in the country at Iowa State, it will be closing after the spring semester. And unfortunately, that space will be turned into a study space. I think it's really important to read books such as this, not only to really kind of understand why some things are currently happening, but also the history behind some of the historic legislation that have happened. But for me personally, I want to know and understand more about the Black experience to really get and understand how we got here. I do feel like in reading literature, I'm really going to get a better understanding of the intersectionality of everything, kind of like the intersectionality of being Black and being a woman. So I'm really looking forward to reading this book. I will be sure to do a deep dive and let you guys know what I think about it via a book review that I will be putting on my blog, as well as I will be talking about it on a future episode of the podcast. So this is my January book. The list will be linked in the show notes. Please take a moment, check it out, look it over, and let me know also if you plan on reading any of these books either in January or at any time during the year. Now, with that being said, though, let's go ahead and get right into this week's interview, and then I will be back at the end to talk about takeaways from the interview as well as a preview into next week's episode. All right, everyone. So let's go ahead and get into today's episode, and let me introduce you to our guest. So she is a decorated educator, practitioner, and advocate for social justice. She is the Human Services and Inclusion Director for the City of West Des Moines. Committed to justice and equity, she has played a pivotal role in shaping policies and programs that prioritize historically marginalized communities. Originally from Denver, Colorado, she moved to Iowa to attend Clarke University in Dubuque, where she earned her bachelor's degree in elementary education and philosophy. She then went on to Iowa State University, where she attained her master's degree in education and a certificate in social justice education, and she has also completed coursework towards her master's in community and regional planning. She has been recognized with numerous awards and accolades for her outstanding contributions to the community, Those accolades include the 2024 I'll Make Me a World in Iowa Executive Director Award, the 2022 West Des Moines Chamber DEI Leader of the Year, from Iowa State University, the 2021 College of Human Sciences Outstanding Young Professional Award, the 2019 Martin Luther King Jr. Advancing One Community Award, 2017 University Award in Inclusive Excellence, and 2015 College of Design Academic Advising Award. Her 11 awards, 4 grants, and 18 professional service involvements have made a lasting impact on communities she serves. In addition to her professional achievements, she considers her most important roles to be that of a mother, wife, and a woman of faith. These roles are central to her life and values, guiding her in her personal and professional journey. Ladies, gentlemen, and non-binary friends, I'd like to welcome Audrey Kennis to the show. Audrey, thank you so much for being here.
Wonderful introduction. Thank you so much for the invitation.
You are welcome. And that's a fantastic bio. I love it when people send me their bios and I don't have to do anything. I get to just read it. So that was like perfection. So thank you so much for that.
I appreciate it.
Before we kind of like jump into the interview, I just want to say, so I met Audrey maybe like 2 or 3 weeks into my tenure at Iowa State. And as soon as I got to Iowa State, you left. I remember April Finley was like, oh, you got to meet Audrey. Everybody's like, you got to meet Audrey. She is so great. You're going to absolutely love her. And they were absolutely right. Absolutely loved you and felt like almost like an immediate connection because I feel like for a lot of people that work at Iowa State, especially the Black women on campus, there is a true connection and purpose and meaning to what you do. And I feel like when exude that passion for what you do, it spreads to others. So I was so excited. I was like, oh man, she's great. She's one of the directors of multicultural student success. I have so many questions. And they're like, oh yeah, she's going to go to the city of West Des Moines. So
I know.
Yes.
Because I was so excited and I was excited, like, yes, we got someone at Missions, because that's where I started, right?
Okay.
So I was so excited to see you come through the doors. And I knew you would make a tremendous impact because your energy, right? You can breathe someone's energy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh man. So I'm just delighted that our paths crossed again and you invited me to be here today. So thank you.
Absolutely. So, you've been now with the city of West Des Moines have you been there for 3 years?
Almost. It'll be 3 years.
Almost
September.
3 years.
That's correct.
Started out tell us kind of like what
Journey.
You started as in West Des Moines, and then we'll go ahead and kind of talk about your recent promotion and what you're doing now.
Yeah. So I came to the city about 3 years ago for a position. I was the director of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I still am. I'm still critical to the work that I do. But I applied for this position. I always say God works in mysterious ways because I wasn't even looking for a job. And I had a really good friend. I always got to give her a shout out. Elizabeth Martinez Podolsky. She went up to the University of Minnesota as their assistant dean up there for the College of Vet Med. She was looking for a job and goes, Audrey, I found the perfect job for you. And I go, Elizabeth, stop. Like, I'm not even looking for a job right now. She had been looking. We all knew. And I was like all emotional. And I'm like, no, I'm good. Because I had just decided to go back and pursue a second master's.
Okay.
So I was doing a master's in community and regional planning, which everyone said, why are you doing a second master's, Audrey? Like, that doesn't make sense. Just go on. Everybody had a plan for my life and said, go and get your PhD. You're in education. I had people tell me, I could see you being a provost or the college president or college. So everyone was telling me what I should do. And I said, nah, I'm going to do something different. So let me go back and do this planning degree. And so she seen this job and was like, oh my gosh, Audrey, this is the intersection of all the pieces you've been talking about. And so I read it after she sent it and I was like, oh my gosh, you are right. This is exactly what I'm trying to accomplish. So listen, the rest is history, but I give praise to the Most High because, I could not even imagine when I started doing a second master's in planning, my goal was to maybe be a city planner, and look at, like comprehensive planning and zoning and land use and really looking at like community-based, planning, participatory planning and like really trying to do community activism. And I had no clue. I was like, oh, I just felt right. And it was what I knew I needed to do. So 3 years later, I'm here and now it's continued to evolve. So now, as you said, I am now the director of human services and inclusion. So I recently assumed a new department and I just absolutely love it. And it really is tied to the work that I was doing before. So I give all credit to, my city manager and our leadership team and our council and my mayor, because they've seen it and were able to help me put together the pieces.
Yeah. And, I think that what you said about how when you look at the position, because again, you're not looking for anything, but when you look and you see, wait, this exactly aligns with what I want to do, I really feel like that's really where that passion for a position can really shine. And that's really when you know that whatever company, whatever it is that you're doing, they are going to get the best. I feel like when I started at Iowa State 3 years ago, I was looking for another job. I was like, and really shade to my alma mater, because I was assistant director of admissions there. And I loved it, but I knew I couldn't do anything else but that. And I really wanted to leverage some skills that I had learned in project management and interpersonal communications and in recruitment, and understanding why marginalized communities needed to know what all of their options were if higher education is what they wanted to do. So when I saw this position at Iowa State, I was, it was funny because I will shout out my boss, Dave Williams. I remember taking it to him and he said, and I was like, I don't think I'm qualified. And he was like, okay, cool. So I'm going to highlight everything in red of what you're not qualified for. And there was not a drop. There was not a drop of red ink. And I was like, all right, well, looks like we're going for it. And then it all works out. And that also speaks to connection and how people are always looking out for you. But I think the other thing is, do you watch Real Housewives at all? Any of them?
I used to, okay. I enjoy me some mindless TV sometimes.
Man, listen, I love it. So there's a lady, Dr. Wendy Osefo, and she's on the Potomac franchise. She has 4 degrees. And I remember that was like the big thing. Remember? And everybody's like, oh, why do you have 4 degrees? Whatever. And it's funny because got to Iowa State, went through a divorce. I'm bored. I'm going to get a degree. Now that my degree is almost over, my master's, I'm like, do I need another one? This program actually looks like really good, It's just like Black women, like, we can't sit still.
Right. It is so, but it's like, I love learning. I want to know more. I want to see more, right?
Yes, absolutely. Like, I want to absorb as much as I possibly can, because I know that in the end, it's going to benefit me. It could potentially benefit someone else in my community. So,
and that's it.
Yes, exactly. But part of our conversation is definitely going to be about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Yeah. We live in a state that unfortunately really wants to be Texas, Alabama, and Florida, to where there is this visceral attack on DEI initiatives. And I just had Dr. Kia Levy on. She's the inaugural VP of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Simpson. Had a great conversation about how everything is going in the private school world. But I want to first talk with you because you are from Denver, Colorado.
That's right.
So you went from Denver to a small private Catholic school in Dubuque, Iowa, the farthest corner northeast of the state.
I'm still trying to figure it out.
Listen,
20-something years later, I'm still trying to figure this out.
And you've been here for 22 years.
Yes.
Let's take it back. Let's go back to a young 17, 18-year-old Audrey. Talk to me about your experience, first of all, being from Denver, and what drew you to go to Clarke?
Yeah.
How did that even get in your mind?
Because it didn't, right? Something must have happened for me to land in Dubuque, Iowa at the time, especially, and this was a Dubuque that recently had cross burnings, right? So, and nobody told me that part.
No,
right?
So, not at all.
I will say I grew up again in Denver. It was such a unique community. I went to Denver East High, which is like an iconic high school, one of the public high schools in the country. So there was something very special about it. And that's one thing I appreciated. And we were talking earlier, it was cool to be smart. Like, I went to a school where it was cool to be smart. Right before I went to the high school, though, I was in a performing arts school, which, again, you had to audition to get in. It was a pretty elite process, the Denver School of the Arts, right? So I was a dance major. And so I had a lot of exposure to a lot of different people, socioeconomic statuses, cultures, like, and so it really broadened my view of the world, right? Which was such a gift. Now, I was a kid who grew up in the hood, right? Like,
Okay.
I grew up in the hood, and most people would say, "What? There are black people in Colorado?" I used to get that a lot. Now I get it here in Iowa. Like, there's black people not? Yes, there are black people here.
Of course there's black people in Denver. Like, that is
Yeah,
so wild.
listen, that was all the
Okay.
time. There are black
Okay.
people in Denver. We
In
got that all the
Denver.
time growing up.
Okay.
And so, yes, there are a lot of black people there, and we had a lot of gangs there too, because it's still more kind of West Coast culture. And so, we had the shootings all the time. I have siblings who were shot at basketball courts, or shootings around the block. And so I grew up in a beautiful community. It still was beautiful. Like, we had gang members down the block. And unfortunately, I think sometimes we cast type people, they were my friends. And so I could see, again, they weren't always making the right choices, but there were still a lot of really great people who got caught into a lifestyle that really they didn't have control. And so it was just unfortunate. But I ended up, I had a very strong family system, a support network. My mother and my father were very, deeply rooted in the church. And so that really insulated myself and my siblings. I come from a large family of all practically boys. I have one girl cousin. Well, I have more girl cousins, but the one who was closest to me in age, it was she and I. And then there were like 15 boy cousins.
Oh, wow.
We were all like together, stair steps. And then we had some younger girl cousins. And so, like, none of them were in prison. None of them, have had any charges of any sort. Like, and that was unique. You didn't find that often, but it really was. We had a very strong family support system. And again, a deep-rooted spiritual faith that was able to insulate us from a lot of the external things that I've seen a lot of my friends and the kids I went to school with, unfortunately succumbed to.
Right.
So yeah, that, I was going to East, and I'll be honest, I wasn't the best student in high school. I was smart. I was always a really smart student. So I took accelerated classes, but my life was very tumultuous. My father died when I was 14.
Oh,
so,
wow. Okay, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, listen, and that's, it's a life-altering experience. And so my father died next to me on Thanksgiving morning, which is just such an interesting story, because my son was then born on Thanksgiving morning, the same day that my father passed 11 years later. So it's just, I always say again, God shows up in my life.
He really does. Absolutely.
And so he passed. And so, my priorities was in school. Like, I was trying to survive. My mother got remarried. She didn't live with us. And so me and my siblings, I was the youngest of three. So my two older siblings, it was, and me lived in a house by ourselves. And so my older sibling was 19, my other was 17. And then there I was, a 14-year-old. And again, we could have gotten into all kinds of trouble.
Yeah.
We had a strong foundation. And so I didn't. But, again, school just wasn't a huge priority. I was like, I had my grandfather move in, trying to take care of him. So just there was a lot I was trying to manage and balance. But long story short, of course, graduated and I was going to go to college. I had planned to go. I applied to University of Northern Colorado. I got in at Metro. And so I was going to go to school in town.
Okay.
And then my younger cousin, she's a year younger than me. She was applying to schools, and somehow, we know, because we work in admissions at some point. I used to, right? So, there's the list that you can buy, and they got her contact information from Clarke.
Yeah.
And we're sending her stuff and trying to heavily recruit her. I don't even know why they were trying to recruit her so hard. Didn't make sense.
Yeah.
But she applied and she got in. Long story short, she begged me to come with her. She and I were like sisters. And so we had never been really separated. And so my family's like, she can't go. Cece can't go without you. You got to go with her. And so I applied thinking it was August. School started 2 weeks later. I was like, let me just apply, because she kept begging me and she's crying. And like, we can't be separated. So I applied thinking they ain't going to get me in, because most schools had an admission deadline.
Yeah, they have the cutoff. Yeah.
Right. These suckers got me in. So I'm like, wait, hold on. And then they told her first. So, listen, Clarke University, you're on notice, because you ain't supposed to be disclosing.
Exactly.
Right? Listen, somebody messed up. So she found out, calls me excited, because they knew they're like, oh, we can get her and her cousin. And so she's like, and I'm like, wait, hold on. I wasn't really trying to go. I was just trying to show up.
I was trying to make you happy.
Right. I was trying to
calm you down.
And here we go. So long story short, that's really how I got here. I had no clue where Iowa was. So I didn't do the best in geography, obviously. I thought it was Idaho. So I was like,
yeah, that's usually what we get. When I lived in Arizona, people would be like, oh, so where are you from? I'm from Iowa. Oh, the potato state. Yep. Capital is Cleveland. It's great. Love it. And like people would just like not even
bat an eye.
understand what
Right.
I just said.
Oh,
She's from Iowa, the potato state. Yep. Sure
this is
am.
it. Idaho. I get all this. Yeah, I'm from Iowa. Idaho. Okay. Yep. So,
Exactly.
we get here and, the story is what it became. I never looked back. I've been here ever since.
Yeah.
And I will say it's been the greatest blessing that I never expected it to be. Right. I thought I would come here and get an education and quickly go back home.
Yeah.
But I've learned so much about myself in these 20-something years. I've grown exponentially. And again, Iowa has been, like this fertile soil to really allow me to really explore who I am, learn who I am, and also be able to grow and make mistakes.
Yes.
Which I don't know if I would have gotten that much grace back at home.
Oh, I think a couple of things about your story that I really love is that first, with working in admissions, you have the students that they've been planning what school they're going to go to since they were like in the 3rd grade. And I love talking to those students. But I feel like something needs to be said about how you can be successful, even though if you feel like you have a late start. Like I talk with students all the time and they're just like, well, I got to make a decision. And I'm like, what are you talking about? You're a junior in high school. You don't have to decide.
Right. You're going to be okay.
I didn't start applying to college until 2nd semester of my senior year. And it was like, oh, damn, all my friends already know where they're going. I need to fix this. And
the pressure's real.
Exactly. But also taking the path unknown. I mean, I went to Simpson, so it was down the street, and I was close and I was local. But for you to come 20 hours into the heartland.
A whole new Malou. I was not ready.
Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about your experience at Clarke? Because it is on the Iowa private college circuit. It would be kind of considered like a sister school to like Drake and Simpson and Dordt and all of those.
Yes.
So, talk to me about when you got there. I mean, I know it was culture shock. So, So kind of talk to me about, your college years and how you started to kind of become the Audrey that you are today.
Yeah, listen, it was interesting because, we drove out here and I remember it was a mess. I was like, am I supposed to be going here? The car broke down on the way here and I'm standing, I don't know where I was at, some small little town, I think between here and Nebraska. And there was an eagle. I promise it was an eagle flying over my head. And again, I pay attention to everything and I'm going, okay, I guess I'm going to be okay. I'm going to be okay. And that was all the reassurance I needed. So I get there, I get to Clarke, and I'll tell you, it was beautiful. So I remember driving in, and if you've been to Dubuque, you have the big bridge that you're coming in over, and then there's the bridge over the Mississippi. And again, I'm a kid from the city. Yeah. Right. And so Denver, we ain't got no large bodies of water. Read about the Mississippi, right? And so I remember coming in, I was like, oh, they got a roller coaster. I think that's just how young and innocent I was. I was like, is that a roller coaster? No, baby, that's a bridge.
It's a bridge.
It's a bridge, okay? There's a big, large body of water ahead of you. But so I remember just coming in and just being like amazed by the geographic like beauty. There were trees, and so, like during orientation, they put you in groups with other students, and so we went out and we did some exploring through town, and we went to go look at the Mississippi, and I got emotional. I'm
really,
like, I got emotional, which that's what people are like, what is wrong? I remember the kids are like, what's wrong with this girl?
It's so interesting because, I lived in Cheyenne, Wyoming for about 10 months.
Wow.
And I got it. That's a whole story. I'm going to have to tell that on another podcast.
You go up there.
Yeah.
Listen.
Cheyenne was like one of the most interesting places I have ever lived. But I remember driving to Denver and me and my ex-husband are in the car and he's like, what is that? What is that in the distance? No big deal. It's the Rocky Mountains. So I'm trying to understand how you being from a city with literally this beautiful, majestic mountain range,
you don't even think
and then you're like, you
it.
come here to like the flattest state in the country.
Oh my
and it's
gosh.
just like, it's so beautiful.
It was
I love
gorgeous.
it. I love it.
But that was it. You don't appreciate what you have until you don't have it, right? So I didn't think anything about the mountains. I'm like, that's the mountains.
Right.
Who cares?
Yeah,
we live
that's
on the
Rockies. Whatever. Don't nobody care about those.
Right. Like I look out my window every day, I see them. It's not a big deal, right? So for me, it wasn't anything that was gorgeous or scenic. And I learned more about Denver when I left. I learned more about Colorado, I should say, when I left. Because people would tell me, "Oh, have you gone? Have you?" I'm like, "Man, we never do this, right?" But I'm a Black kid in Colorado, right?
Yeah.
We ain't living like that. That's a whole other world than most of us were exposed to. So I get here though, but I was deeply moved because I've read about the Mississippi, right? I understood history, and I've always been a lover of history. So you read about Lewis and Clark, and you read about I just imagine indigenous communities moving up, through the lands and the territories, and so it was being transported back in time for me. And I was like, wow, like, again, we don't have that many trees. And so just to be there, and then the humidity, I was like, well, I'm so confused.
Yeah.
Why is it humid here? We're not like in Florida. So that was that was something that was just the environment was a culture shock. But then well, man, I'm in Dubuque. Right. This is the early 2000s. I got kids walking up to me, calling me colored person, folks. And again, I appreciated their humility or just, honesty. They're probably just ignorant young kids. We all were.
Yeah, it's
I
usually
was
what it
ignorant
is.
too,
Yeah.
right? And so, like, can I touch your hair? I've never been around a Black person before. So, I'm building all these questions. And the interesting part, because, my cousin came with me, as I had mentioned. And so for her, she used to get it bothered her quite a bit. Like, there would be ignorant and racist comments that folks would say, and it was unintentional, right? And a lot of microaggressions, often unintentional, not always, right?
Yes.
And so she would just get angry, and she was she was miserable here to the point that she ended up bringing. So I came. She ended up getting her brother to come. She got her fiance, who's now her husband, to come. She got another friend to come. Like, she brought like 5, 6 folks with her.
Okay, cool. So Clarke University, y'all owe Audrey Cousin a check, because it really sounds like she brought y'all in some serious money. So
we meeting, you talk about diversity quota. I'm kidding. There was no quota, but like, listen, like there was an increase by like 400% in that short year. So, so she ended up bringing all of us, right? But she was trying to make herself happy, and it was interesting because I'm like, and I seen it just very different. Like for her, it's just like I don't have the patience for this.
Yeah.
And it forced me to step back and ask the question, why? So instead of getting angry, I just asked, why? Why are you asking me that silly question? Or like, what experience or lack thereof have you had or not had that would trigger you to say that, right? Or ask that, right? And so it really forced me to start to understand context, right? Cultural context of where people are coming from and how we're conditioned by the environments in which we come from.
Yeah. And I think especially just with that experience, I was lucky enough as well. So I went to Simpson with 2 of my close friends.
Oh.
So shout out to Brittany and Kahara. So we went to Simpson together. And our first year, fall 2004, there were 6 Black kids that started.
Wow.
And on campus, there were maybe 10 to 15 other Black kids.
Wow.
That was it. Done. For me, it was a culture shock, even though like I'm from Des Moines, because just like what we already talked about, I went to Roosevelt High School. Roosevelt was at the time, was a really diverse high school. So we went to school with kids from all kinds of cultural, socioeconomic backgrounds. And we didn't, the microaggressions and things like that were there, even though we probably didn't know what they were at the time. But a lot of I've never talked to Black people, can I share? That stuff just didn't happen.
Yeah.
So
like they had enough exposure that you knew.
We had the exposure, but
cultural norm.
Yes. But then when we got to Simpson, it was just like, well, wait. Like, this is incredibly weird. But looking back, and this is just so true that, yes, you do have your liberal pieces of the state, right? So that's why I like when people are like, you're from Iowa. I'm from Des Moines, Iowa. Don't get it twisted. I want to make sure Polk County is where I am from, right? But at the same time, though, Iowa, like a lot of other flyover states, prioritize whiteness over everything else. So, of course, there isn't that need or that push for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and really understanding how the cultures are different, but also how to approach and talk to other people of cultural significance and difference. Because again, it's all about making the majority
feel comfortable.
And leading into the topic of conversation, it is so weird that how educating white people about cultural significance, cultural diversity, socioeconomic diversity, all of these things that is just being attacked.
Yeah.
Especially in higher education. Private schools, it's not. I actually just read a report that schools like Simpson and Drake and a lot of those are actually starting to broaden and open up their diversity, equity, and inclusion offices.
They're leaning in.
When Iowa State and University of Northern Iowa have since closed theirs.
Yeah.
And then with the city of West Des Moines, we look at your position. Before, I just have one more question about your college experience. And, you said that you you went to Clarke, graduated, and you've been here for 22 years. Why did you stay?
That's a good question. And that I don't, well, I do know my husband. So that's, that's always what keeps you, right? His family's from here, but, he was from here. And so, you're young and you start like planting roots and you do an internship and then you start making connections and then you get a job and you're like, okay, well, we'll just do a job for a few years. And that was always our plan. We didn't buy a house for many years because we're like, okay, we're moving to Denver. When I was at Iowa State for years, I was like, we're not buying a house. We're going to keep renting because we're moving to Denver. Iowa State and HR, they know who's planning to stay and who's planning to go. So they give you the option of IPERS or
the other one that you could move around.
CIA craft, right? But you got only 3 years to be invested for craft, and you need the 7 for IPERS. Listen, I was like, give me that IPERS.
Yes.
Or give me the craft, excuse me, not IPERS. Give me that craft, because I'm leaving, okay? We're not doing more than 4 years, and I'm gone. And then 11 years later, I'm still there. So I'm just so mad at myself. But, again, I will say, just the experience, but I've been blessed here. Like that's one thing people have to understand. I think we take for granted for those who are either from Iowa or been in Iowa for some time is there is so much opportunity here that I think we don't even recognize. And so, coming from a big city, and I go back to Denver all the time. I was there this weekend. I fly home quite often, right? I left my kid there this week. It's a different level, right? And so if you think it's hard here, good luck.
Yeah.
Go to one of these bigger cities. And again, you think you don't have opportunity now. Again, just be in that type of environment, which is so much more complex. It's so much harder to be able to find opportunities for advancement. But more importantly, it's hard to make mistakes and be able to recover.
Right.
So that was the beauty, I think, here. This was, again, the perfect environment to allow me to, learn more about myself, to really explore my identities and really develop my own sense of self outside of family and other factors, right? I really had to do that soul searching. I was able to, to explore different career options.
Yeah.
And I would say even at Iowa State, like there was a willingness or an appetite. I would say I am a visionary. That's one of my skills, right? I'm a big picture type person. So when I see something, when I see a gap, I'm really good at seeing what's missing and trying to fix it, right? I always call myself the fixer. And so, I would, when I came on campus, I remember going, where are all the Black people at? I came from I came from a community college. I was at Hawkeye Community College.
Okay,
My good friend, who is now the mayor, Quentin Hart, was like, Audrey, listen, you're going to go to Iowa State. He talked it up. I was like jazzed. He's like, we got this Black faculty network, and there's going to be this, and there's that. Listen, I showed up on the first day. I was like, where's everybody at?
Yeah, where's everybody at?
Like, is there a welcome group? Like, what happened? Listen, it was crickets. And you would see people, but we're just passing, right? And so there was no real connecting point. And so I will tell you, I was like, listen, we got to create an associate. We got to create. And we had it was a Black faculty caucus about years before I came, but then it died out. You lose certain people.
Right, when people get moved around,
and then it dissipates. And so, I had the idea, let's bring it back. We're going to relaunch this. And I took it to the provost office and they're like, absolutely. This is a great idea. But then we expanded that and connected with some other folks on campus. My good friend, Nikki Port, shout out to her. And so, we brought in our LGBT group, and then we were able to build up all these other groups, right? And create a whole network of a faculty and staff association. And so the university didn't say, hey, that's not, there's already enough diversity here and we don't need that. Like, no, they were always open to new and fresh ideas. But I think that's even here in Iowa. People don't know what they don't know, right? And so I don't know if people are just automatically against things. I think sometimes you say, oh, well, this is, there's very little diversity and there's this and this and that. And again, that's true. If you just understand what the environment is, just be real with you. Say, yeah, that's true. But there's also opportunities here that I don't think people always leverage. So just really understanding your environment and just recognizing what unique characteristics and qualities you bring into the space. Like, I know I'm a Black woman and I'm proud of that, right?
Yeah.
And I also know it gives me a different perspective and a new or fresh insight that a lot of my peers and colleagues don't have, right? So I can see things from a different perspective. And that, again, that's my superpower.
Yeah. And, and I think what you said, especially about opportunity, is it's key because, again, people think Iowa, especially like Des Moines, Iowa City, Cedar Rapids, that there's not a lot going on, but actually, we have some of the biggest organizations, the biggest like Fortune 500, Fortune 250 companies that are right here in the state, and they are incredibly lucrative, and there's a lot of different opportunities there.
Right.
And I think for me, moving away for 9 years and then coming back, I knew home was going to be here, like always. But I also did know that if I really wanted to dig in and really figure out what it was I wanted to do when I came back in 2018, the only place I was going to be able to figure that out was home. There was, because I was living in Arizona for 5 years. And like I said, I lived in Cheyenne. And then before that, I lived in Wisconsin for about 3 years. And yeah, I never felt comfortable enough to really like lay down those roots and be like, okay, we're going to figure this out. And and honestly, it wasn't until I moved home, got a divorce, and now I'm like, okay, now I know what my purpose is. It's time.
It's time. Yep. I'm reading the signs, right?
Yes,
Yep.
Yes. God said, get rid of that husband. No problem. Aye. So, but going back and, I really want to talk about what we've already kind of teed up a little bit. And that's just really about the importance to continue to grow in the DEI space. So with you having that position in West Des Moines as Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Director for the city of West Des Moines, you told us kind of why you applied, even though you weren't looking for anything. You've been there for 3 years, but can you talk a little bit about what that position was really about and how it really was something that maybe the city of West Des Moines didn't know that they needed?
Yeah. Listen, I think when I first read the job description, I was like, okay, I think I know what this is doing, but still, it wasn't really clear because I don't know if it was the first, right? So the city was still trying to figure out where does this role really fit, right? And I'll say this, I was proud, and this is why I decided to come here because I was also looking at a position that was supposed to be opening in Ames. So I knew Ames was looking to do it. And I was like, I'm interested in that. I'll apply for this one to kind of prepare myself for the next one. Listen, and I got here and I was like, whoa, this is the place I need to be. And it was clear as day because again, I think we had a leadership team. I had a city manager who really believes in trying to create a welcoming and inclusive environment, a community, right? Where everyone could thrive. And I could, as we're talking, like I'm hearing it and I'm going, okay, yep. Again, we had a council who had voted to really create and develop this role. I'm going, okay, yep. And I could see all the ingredients, right? We had all the ingredients here. We hadn't quite made a meal, but we had the right ingredients to start doing something, right? And cooking something up. And so, I get here and it's like, okay, really, how do we define this? And I do appreciate because I've been given quite a bit of latitude to really define and kind of create what this role looks like, right? So there's a lot of internal and external facing work that I've done through this role, right? Whether that's, internally doing training with departments and working with city leaders, whether that's working with my HR department, right? Whether that's us doing work with our Human Rights Commission, which they're doing quite a bit. And I'm so proud of our Human Rights Commission. I got to give them a shout out because they're really trying to get out there in the community to help folks understand what their rights truly are. A lot of folks don't know what their rights are. And they don't know what is protected and unprotected. So really trying to give them more direction and guidance, right? We created what we call the Community Engagement Institute 2 years ago, trying to get our residents, one, just more aware of what does city government do and to really demystify city government. Because I think people are like, oh yeah, the only time they often have an interaction with government is often negative, right? I'm getting either paying a ticket or I got pulled over, right? Or
they didn't come get my trash cans.
Right. Like usually folks are only calling when there's an issue. But again, every day we're keeping the city moving and people don't notice it, right? And so and if you don't, that means it's working well oftentimes. And so, just working, again, with residents and really trying to help them build a relationship and just connection back to our city leaders, right? And so it's a 7-week institute where they learn about the inner workings of West Des Moines, right? They meet all our department directors, and they also get a chance to provide critical feedback, specifically culturally relevant feedback of like, what can we be doing better? Because we can't be the best city we need to be if we don't understand the needs of our residents. And so that's one thing, in my time here is really trying to push from being transactional, because city government historically has always been very transactional, right? You pay your bill, they pick up your trash, you request, a pool pass. And so it's very transactional and not relational. And that's where we have to move to being more relational, right? Really understanding the needs, not only of our residents. And I don't like using the word citizens. So I always say resident, because everyone who lives here may not be a citizen. So we're also trying to be mindful even of our language, right? How are we being inclusive to make sure everyone feels like they have a voice in the function and the success of our city. And so, so really just trying to work through these pieces, right? Of building those relationships with our community, right? Looking at some of our policies, developing programming, looking at our recruitment cycle and process, right? We just launched our first employee resource groups. Like it's a really trying to cultivate an environment that fosters, inclusivity and welcomingness, right? No matter who you are, what background you come from, you should feel like the city of West Des Moines is a place where you can thrive.
Right.
And so that's where we're really working to get towards. And so, and again, it's an interesting environment to be doing this in right now, where there is a lot of conversation around DEI, right? As if it's the enemy. It's not the enemy. Our job is to make sure our city's accessible, right? So we talk about, we just created, built an inclusive playground, right? Like, how is that divisive? And so I'm still trying to make sense of some of these talking points, pundits who are making statements of it's the big bad wolf. So what is problematic about diversity? Because it's not something you can control.
Right.
Diversity is a byproduct of existence. No two things in nature are ever the same. And so it's just, it just is. And so you don't have to create diversity. Diversity is just there.
Yeah.
But how do we leverage it?
Exactly. And I think too, because this is kind of what happens when those 3 words, diversity, equity, inclusion, are now synonymous with Blackness, when really that's not that. You can, like, when you look those words up in Webster's or in the Oxford Dictionary, you do not see a Black person next to them. So, and then I also think too, there's also this idea that diversity, equity, and inclusion is meant to induce white guilt. And it's like, again, that is not it. Diversity and equity and inclusion, literally what it says. It is a mechanism to ensure that everyone is taken into consideration. It does. It has nothing to do with the whole white guilt thing is another thing, because it's just like, no, you shouldn't feel guilty for what your ancestors did, but you are still benefiting from the systems that they put in place.
But then we all have a responsibility to make things better. So no one is guilty. I can't control what my parents or forebearers did. Like that's nobody. Nobody can do that. But we do have a responsibility to ensure that the current and future generations have a chance to be able to really actualize and achieve what they're here to do, right? Like we all have purpose. We're not, I just don't believe we're all here by happenstance, right? Like everybody has something to contribute. Everyone should be able to feel like they can be a part of the fabric of that community, the society, and be able to be a productive member of it, right?
Yes.
But when we see that disconnect, this is where the problems start to lie, right? And so, no, we all got a responsibility to make it better.
Exactly. We all have a responsibility for dismantling those systems that oppress and hold other people back. And so, and that's one of the reasons why I really wanted to get your perspective on the city level, because again, in this one section, it's being dismantled, but in so many other facets, it's still seen as a necessity. And that's why within Ames, city of West Des Moines, even here in Des Moines, these positions are still here. My next question to you is, with some of the legislation and things that have happened, even though a lot of them have been specific to higher education, is there any fear that some of this legislation could potentially touch things that you are currently planning or working on within your office for the city?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I would say no. I'm not worried. I don't even understand how it could touch anything, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
nothing that we're doing that is discriminatory. Like, our job is to ensure anti-discrimination, right?
Yeah.
Like, and so I don't even understand how it could. So I don't get stuck in the fear of, like, this could come this way. Listen, there are federal laws that are out there to ensure the protection of historically marginalized groups, right? If
Mm-hmm.
like it or you don't, it doesn't
Yeah.
matter. Our laws are designed to do that, right? And there are safeguards that are put in place to ensure that's not happening, right? And that's what my
Mm-hmm.
role and many other people's roles are designed to do is,
Mm-hmm.
again, I'm an ADA coordinator. How are we ensuring that, again, our city is accessible to those with
Yes.
differing abilities, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, like,
Yeah.
okay, help me understand how you come against that.
Yeah.
Again, I think about, our LEP plan, right? Limited English proficiency, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you come against that? And again, I shouldn't say you can't, because I've seen people write bills recently where it said everything should only be exclusively in
Exclusively in
English,
English. Yeah.
which, again, so if we do that, how do we ensure that people have access to resources and services, right? And so it creates an issue of safety, right? If
Mm-hmm.
I can't call 911 or
Mm-hmm.
connect with someone when I'm in an emergency or I need access to a service,
Mm-hmm.
that's an issue of safety. So this isn't about, some fluffy rhetoric of a us versus, there's no us versus them, right?
Right.
This is a best practice, right? This is what a
Right.
21st century city and
Mm-hmm.
just a community, a world should be doing, right? We're trying to make sure people are able to access what they need,
Mm-hmm.
right? So who would ever want to create a manufactured barrier, right? Like,
Yeah.
what's the purpose of that? How does that benefit? Until we
Mm-hmm.
get to the understanding that it's not a zero-sum game, right?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't benefit anyone to exclude others and say, well, we just don't want you to have access, and some of these people can have, but you can't. Like, no, that's not helpful, because
Mm-hmm.
then we're not able to leverage everyone's skill sets. And like I talked about earlier, perspectives, right?
Yeah.
Those
Right.
differences give us unique perspectives
Mm-hmm.
and insights that
Mm-hmm.
folks from other groups may not have. And so we
Mm-hmm.
need that. That's what leads to innovation, right? And
Right.
if we're trying to be an innovative community and a society, right? If we want to be, a state economic leaders, not just
Mm-hmm.
regionally, but really, globally, then
Mm-hmm.
we have to be thinking about what are the unique perspectives, unique skill sets, unique, gifts that people are able to bring to the table that really allows us to be a
Right.
step ahead of others. So,
Right.
so yeah, listen, I don't get stuck in that. I'm going to be
Yeah.
honest.
Yeah. And that's, I think, I love to hear that because in the higher ed world, there is so much uncertainty.
Yeah.
But we also have to always take into account that this is also really important why you need to not only be involved in what your city and local governments are doing, but also making sure that you vote. Because when
Right.
you don't vote, the wrong people get in that aren't truly representative of the people of their
Yeah.
constituents.
Yeah.
So, I think that everything that you said, really another reason why I love this state so
Right.
much. And I
Right.
love especially the people in the state, specifically in Polk County, because again, this is an
Yeah.
incredibly diverse county.
Yeah.
And there are so many different people. And just like what you said, it's way beyond race. It's about accessibility. It's about making sure that language proficiency is there. And
Right.
it's
Right.
so
Our
many
older
different things.
communities,
The
right? We talk
older,
about
yeah,
aging in place. That's another big topic, right?
yeah.
And we look at Iowa, right? We have a growing older demographic, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so how do we ensure folks can age in place if we're not thinking about some of those unique differences, right? And so we just got,
Exactly.
and you can't be a successful business entity, anything, if you're not
Mm-hmm.
understanding the people you serve. That's just
Right.
a basic fundamental
Right.
concept that every business, every city, every government has to take into account. So no,
Mm-hmm.
but one thing I will tell you, I think it is important, even in these conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion, is that everyone can see themselves reflected. And I think that is where
Mm-hmm.
people went wrong, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, again, I was in higher ed with you
Mm-hmm.
at some point. I spent over 11 years.
Yeah.
Well, no, that more than that, 14 years in higher ed.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And you all these years in the academy, we talk about a lot of theoretical constructs, which are very important. These ideas are seeds that equip people with, the movement to propel new ideas, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
with the ideas to be able to come up with new innovative, strategies and ways of doing things. But everyone needs to be able to see themselves reflected in this conversation. And I think that's where we sometimes go wrong, because it was very skewed one way or it's very skewed another way. So even as we talk about diversity, even political diversity, it is important. I'm watching what's happening to our country, and we've become so polarized that, again, the lack of civility has eroded so much that we can't even have conversations across our varying viewpoints. I don't need you to see the world the way I see the world, and I don't need to see the world the way you see the world. But we need to be able to have a conversation about how we can coexist. That's what it's about. Right. And so we have to make sure there's space where everyone is reflected. Because again, if we're talking about diversity, everyone's diverse. I don't care if you're a white male, there's diversity within those spaces as well, within those identities. Right. And so we have to help other people understand this is a conversation that's relevant for everyone. It's not just for Black people or LGBTQIA people or for people with disability. Like, it's everyone. And everyone should thrive.
Absolutely. And these decisions, all of these things, they are going to affect somebody that you know, someone you love, your kid's teacher. Like, this is the impact and the reach that this work actually has. I don't think a lot of people actually really understand, which is another reason why the definitions of the words need to be incredibly clear.
That's
it.
So
yeah, most definitely. So one last question before we end our conversation. And again, I think that the people that are doing this work, and you named some people even at Iowa State that are still doing the work, and they come from all kinds of different diverse perspectives. The one thing I feel like you have to have when you are in a role where you're advocating for people, when you are ensuring that everyone is truly included in decisions and their backgrounds and all of those things, you have to be passionate, because it's not always going to be easy.
No.
What drives your passion to continue to do this work?
Oh, that's a good question. Let's see, I'm going to be real with you. Really, what drives me is my faith. And I have to remember, at the end of the day, it's not about me, right? Even being where I'm at right now with the city, it's not about me. I have a vision, but the vision shouldn't just be about my benefit or my family or those just in my immediate circle. It should benefit everyone, right? And so what drives me is, one, I see there are still lots of inequities, right? We still have a lot of folks who are food insecure and unhoused and all these other issues that we're dealing with, right? Needs are not going away, and they're only exacerbating, right? We see them continue to increase. I'll tell you, just this month, we've had our highest record, our highest month on record, the month of July. We've had more clients come into our human services department in our 45-year history than ever before, just this month, right? So the needs aren't going away. So this is what motivates me, because we got a wicked problem. We got a complex problem. There is no one solution. And so that's what we have to understand. It takes a multitude of people, strategies, and interlocking systems to be able to really start peeling back the onion to get to those root causes. And so at the end of the day, listen, I know why I'm here. And I'm here. It's not just about me, right? And so, and I have a vision that's not from me, that helps me to see beyond myself. And I may not be able to see, all the fruit of my labor come to fruition. I understand that, and I recognize that. But I do understand that this has to be tied to others, right? And so, I always go back to, some of my spiritual principles. I was going to give y'all some, but I'll say that for another day and another conversation.
Oh, yeah, because I'm definitely going to have you back. So
Yes, but it is like, again, our vision, our mission will intersect with others, right? And so there has to be a greater purpose. And that really comes from Genesis 41:15-36. But really understanding, like, why we're here, what is the purpose of what we're doing. And so, I would say that's my motivation, because if you look at the external world, man, you are going to be disappointed.
Yeah.
And if you're looking at currently at what's happening, boy, why do people keep showing up? Right. And so you will lose all hope and motivation if you just look at what is happening in a physical dispensation. But really, you have to see things through a spiritual lens and an eye. And that's for me. And whatever people ascribe to, I'm going to let you do that. I'm not going to tell you have to believe what I believe. But I do think we have lost a spiritual consciousness, whatever that might be for folks, that we get so stuck on what we see in the here and now that we cannot foresee or project the future, right? Like I'm seeing what can be, right? That's the hope. That's the faith that allows me to say, let me keep showing up. Because I might not see it today, but I know it's coming. Right.
I love that. And again, echo what you said, when you step into your purpose, that's when you start to really understand why you're here. And first of all, I am so thankful that I got to work with you at Iowa State for those 3 short weeks. And I'm so happy that I was able to get connected with you and see you at different events and things like that over the last few years. And again, the work that you are doing is incredibly important. And I know that the people of West Des Moines are really going to continuously be blessed by what you're doing, by what your department is doing, and all of the wonderful things that you guys have planned for the future.
Listen.
So that being said, though, I want to make sure, though, that with you being a community leader, a public figure, that people know where to find you, and especially know if they do have questions about their local government and, where they can engage in things like that. So I want to roll out the red carpet, let people know where they can find you, and, any other musings that you might want to share.
Yeah, no, listen, I'm fairly accessible if I'm not in meetings, but you can always reach me. If you go to the City of West Des Moines website, you can type in my name and be able to get a hold of me. The other I'll plug again, it's just our Community Engagement Institute that happens every spring. It's a 7-week institute that allows, again, residents to be able to connect with city leaders, right? And learn about what we do, right? You go from department to department, you travel across the city, you get to see the inner workings of what we do. You meet the council and the mayor and the city manager, but you really get to have a conversation with the people who are making decisions about your life every day, right? And so, that's one area I would encourage people if you want to really learn more or even understand how the process works. Feel free to reach out to me. Let's get you connected with our Community Engagement Institute. But, again, there's so many ways to get involved. Tell folks come to the city council meeting. It may not seem like it makes sense, but again, it is critically important that people show up, right? That's where the biggest decisions are being made about people's lives every other week, right? And so I encourage people to show up there. But feel free to reach out to me. It's Audrey Kennis at wdm.iowa.gov. You can send me an email. I'm happy to follow up and answer any questions. But more importantly, I want to see people show up and give back, right? That's one thing we're trying to cultivate is a community of care. We all have a responsibility we talked about. And so I want to see, not just asking me questions, but I got questions for everyone else as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And and if you have questions and they have questions, I mean, dialogue is going to come. And I think that's fantastic. So Audrey, thank you again for being here. I'm definitely going to have you back because there are so many other things I want to talk to you about. So I will definitely be sure to have you back. So, but right now, y'all, what we're going to do, we'll go ahead and wrap up the interview, take a short break, and I will be back with final thoughts. I hope you all enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. I want to once again thank Audrey Kennis for taking the time and being on the podcast and just really letting me pick her brain about the DEI work that she is currently doing with the city of West Des Moines. And again, I think the call to action in her interview was, again, get involved. There's a reason why our taxes do pay a certain portion of things that happen in our cities. And it is totally normal and okay. And it's actually encouraged for us citizens to be involved in our local government. I have said multiple times on this podcast, especially after the last election, and then also in the episode that I did with Clemente Love, it is incredibly important who you vote for. It is incredibly important who you vote for because these are the people that are supposed to be lobbying and really putting forth our needs. And there are people in our local governments like Audrey that want to hear from us so they can know and understand that they are acting on our best interest and on our behalf. So again, thank you so much, Audrey, for being on the show. I will tell you, I think, and before I get into takeaways, a couple of things about my podcast so far. Audrey's interview was about 55 minutes. Okay. And that's after I did all my editing, cleaned it up a bit, got rid of some pauses and things like that, right? The total time, though, that I spent talking to Audrey was like 2 hours. And that is before and after the interview recording. And again, my favorite part of this podcast is the before and after conversations that I get to have with people. And then, of course, being able to see people like out and about basically around the city is just like one of my favorite things. And we had some really great conversation, and I think Audrey is definitely like, she's like one of my mentors at this point. And I just really, really enjoy the story that she told of not only, her pathway from Iowa State to working with the city of West Des Moines, but also just how in the hell she got here in the first place. And that is another thing that I absolutely love about this podcast, because in upcoming episodes that I'll be sharing with you guys, the number one question I ask everybody is, why the hell are you here? How did you get here? Especially like if you're not like from Iowa, right? But I think one thing that Audrey said that really kind of like stuck out to me, and I do want to go a little bit more in depth in, is when she was talking about microaggressions and some of the things that she was seeing while at Clarke University, of people asking, can I touch your hair? People saying that they've never talked to Black people before and things like that. She made a statement about understanding cultural context, where people come from, and how we are conditioned by the environment in which we come from. That is critical. I think that is so critical, because I always say, like, if I knew then what I know now, I probably maybe would not have been as maybe radical or mean, even like in my college years, because a lot of the things that she was talking about that her and her cousin faced up at Clarke, and, me and Audrey are only a few years apart, that's what I faced when I went to Simpson, and Simpson is 15 minutes away from my hometown, right? But it was really one of those things where I didn't really understand how somebody's environment would make it so that they would never see or talk to Black people. But now that I'm older, I'm at the big age of 38, and I can really understand how isolated some of these places are, specifically and especially in Iowa. I can kind of see that a little bit more now, because if there are no Black people in your town, then that kind of makes sense, right? That you really wouldn't have a lot of interaction with either Black people or people of color. So that was something that I'm really happy that she talked about. And for her at that young age to be able to take a step back and understand cultural significance and context, I think is really important. It's definitely something that that I have learned myself over the years and taking more into consideration. However, I also think, though, that leading into kind of her purpose, her drive and determination for not only understanding diversity, equity, and inclusion work, but also ensuring that the people within her community, that the citizens that she, is making these decisions and working on behalf of, need to understand that diversity, equity, inclusion is basically ingrained in everything that we do. The fact that those three words are synonymous now with Blackness, and so people automatically think, oh, they're bad, there's a really big problem with that, because diversity, equity, inclusion, the intersectionality of those words and how they integrate into almost every every piece of our lives, I think is incredibly important. And I still, to this day, do not understand why people don't understand that. Diversity, equity, inclusion isn't necessarily about giving a leg up. It's about creating a level playing field. It's about ensuring that everyone has an opportunity to be successful, and that those marginalized communities, those people that are usually on the fringe and on the outside, we're able to bring those people in. And people don't really understand that it goes so far beyond color. It includes your sexual identity. It includes your gender. It includes if you have a disability, if you're a veteran. It includes so many different things. And it's not even that we're still having to talk about those things, but it's the fact that we have to continuously define the word when it is so clear is really baffling to me. But at the same time, I know that there are people like Audrey and other people, even here within the city of Des Moines, that are actively doing that work to ensure that those marginalized communities are brought to the forefront, and that their needs are not only being met, but they're being heard as well, which I think is incredibly important. I think the other thing about Audrey's conversation and in her interview is hearing her talk about how beautiful Iowa was or is. Her being an 18-year-old kid coming here for the first time, I thought was awesome. Iowa is an incredibly beautiful state. I don't care what anybody says. I stand 10 toes down in the beauty of this state. And so to hear from somebody else's perspective, I think is great. But also in contrast, just rehearing and listening and editing this conversation really makes me remember about like my first times living in Wisconsin, or my first time seeing the Rocky Mountains, or my first time going through Sedona down Interstate 17 heading to Phoenix, where I eventually ended up in Yuma for 5 years. There are some really beautiful parts of this country, and I mean, Iowa is no exception. Even though I still do like to play with people that aren't from here and they ask me where I'm from, and then I tell them I'm from Iowa, and then they think I'm actually from Idaho, I still play with people in their face about that 100%, and I will probably never not do it. Last but not least, for something else that I really enjoyed about this episode is something that Audrey said towards the end, which is, your vision or mission will always intersect with someone else's. And I had said something to the effect of, when you step into your purpose, that's when you start to really understand why you are here. And hearing the passion that Audrey has for the work that she does, based off of everything that I talked about in last week's episode, it just really made sense with kind of really where I am with life, and understanding not only what my purpose is, but truly living into my passion, which is this podcast. So, hearing and sharing stories like this will always be something that I will do. And I just, again, those people that are truly passionate about the work that they are doing, they're out there. And I fully intend on getting to know as many of them as possible. So with that being said, though, that's going to be it for this week's episode. Again, big thanks to Audrey for taking the time and talking with me on this episode. As for next week, we are going to be speaking to a very special guest that I actually connected with when I went to an event called Stories to Tell My Daughter back in September. Her name is Dr. Destiny Woodruss, and she will be on the show next week talking about not only her experience in Iowa, but also her experience going through things in life that we don't necessarily think are going to happen, and how we rise above those times of adversity when the darkness kind of seems to take over. So I'm very excited to have that conversation with Dr. Destiny. Also have some really awesome episodes coming up for you guys. Don't forget to please check out the 2025 Black Girl Iowa Reading Challenge. Cass will be the first book from that list that I will be checking out, by Isabel Wilkerson. And I am so excited to dive into this book. I've got the audio, I've got this, so I will be able to read, listen, take notes, do all of those things, and then talk about how I feel about the book at a later date. So again, thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Be sure to check me out on TikTok and on Instagram at Black Girl Iowa. And don't forget also, I do have a website, blackgirliowa.com. That's where my blog is located. I do have some posts that are going to be coming up over the next couple of weeks, so be sure to check those out. This is your girl, Emily, with the Black Girl Iowa podcast, signing off, and I will see you guys on the next one. Bye.